But if the celestial body is moved by the intellectual substance, as has been shown, and the movement of the celestial body is directed to generation in the lower ones, it is necessary that the generations and movements of these lower ones proceed from the intention of the intelligent substance. For the intention of the principal agent and of the instrument is brought to the same point. Now, heaven is the cause of lower motions, according to its own motion, by which it is moved by intellectual substance. It follows, then, that it is like an instrument of intellectual substance. Therefore, the forms and movements of the lower bodies are caused and intended by the intellectual substance, as by the principal agent, but by the celestial body, as by the instrument. Now it is necessary that the species of things which are caused and intended by the intellectual agent pre-exist in his understanding, just as the forms of artificers pre-exist in the intellect of the artificer, and are derived from them into effects. Therefore all the forms which are in these lower things, and all the movements, are derived from the intellectual forms which are in the understanding of some substance or some. And for this reason, Boethius says in the book De Trinitate, that the forms which are in matter came from the forms which are without matter. And as far as this is concerned, the statement of Plato is verified, that separate forms are the principles of forms which are in matter, although Plato posited them as subsisting by themselves and directly causing the forms of the sensible. But let us posit them as existing in the intellect, and causing the lower forms through the motion of the heavens. Because everything that is moved by something by itself, and not according to accident, is directed by him to the end of its movement. But the celestial body is moved by intellectual substance, and the celestial body causes by its own motion all the motions in these lower ones. It is necessary that the celestial body be directed to the end of its motion by intellectual substance, and consequently all the lower bodies to their proper ends. Therefore it is not difficult to see how natural bodies, lacking knowledge, are moved and act for the sake of the end. For they tend to the end as directed to the end by an intelligent substance, in the same way as an arrow tends to the mark directed by the archer. For just as an arrow attains its inclination to a determined end from the impulse of the archer, so natural bodies attain their inclination to natural ends from natural movers, from which they derive their forms and virtues and movements. From this, it is also clear that every work of nature is the work of an intelligent substance, for the effect is more principally attributed to the first mover directed to the end than to the instruments directed by him. And for this reason the operations of nature are found to proceed orderly to their end, like the operations of the wise. It is therefore plain that even those things which lack knowledge can work for the sake of the end, and desire the good with a natural appetite, and desire the divine likeness and proper perfection. Now it makes no difference whether it is said this or that, for by the fact that they tend toward their own perfection, they tend toward good, since each thing is good in so far as it is perfect. According to the fact that it tends to the fact that it is good, it tends to divine likeness. For something is likened to God in so far as it is good. Now this or that particular good has that which is desirable, inasmuch as it is a similitude of the first goodness. Because of this, therefore, he tends to his own good, because he tends to the divine likeness, and not the other way around. From this, it is clear that all things aspire to divine likeness as the ultimate end. But the good of anything can be taken in many ways. In the first way, according to what is proper to him by reason of the individual. And so the animal desires its good when it desires the food in which it is preserved. In another way, according to the nature of his species. And so the animal desires its own good insofar as it desires the generation of offspring and its nutrition, or whatever else works for the preservation or defense of the individuals of its species. But in the third way, on account of the race. And so he desires his own good in causing the agent to be equivocal, like heaven. And in the fourth way, by reason of the similitude of the analogy of the principles to their principle. And so God, who is outside the genus, gives existence to all things for the sake of his good. From this it is clear that the more perfect a thing is in virtue, and the more eminent in the degree of goodness, the more common is the appetite for good, and the more does it seek and work for good in those distant from itself. For the imperfect tend only to the good of the proper individual, but perfect for the good of the species, but more perfect for the good of the race. But God, who is most perfect in goodness, is for the good of the whole being. Hence, it is not undeservedly said by some that good, as such, is diffusive, because the better something is found, the more it spreads its goodness to the more distant. And since in every kind that which is most perfect is the model and measure of all that are of that kind, it is necessary that God, who is most perfect in goodness and spreads his goodness most widely, should in his diffusion be the model of all those who spread goodness. But to the extent that each one spreads goodness to others, it becomes the cause of others. From this also it is evident that each thing, tending to the fact that it is the cause of others, tends to divine likeness, and nevertheless tends to its own good. It is not incongruous, then, if the motions of the heavenly bodies and the actions of their motors are said to be in some way due to these bodies which are generated and decay, which are more unworthy of them. For they are not for the sake of these, as for the sake of the last end. But intending the generation of these, they intend their own good and divine likeness as the last end.